Hello and welcome. This is Working Class to World Class. But before we go any further, I do have a little favour of you. If you could hit that follow or subscribe button, then that would be a massive help. Thank you. In this episode, I'm catching up with a guy who followed his dream to establish a business, and today it is $1 billion business. He's originally from Bradford, he's originally working class, and he is now taking on the world. Breaking through the barriers of adversity. I'm Lynn Lester, and this is Working Class to World Class. So Lee, welcome on the show. Thanks so much for giving up the time to do this.
Thanks for having me, Lynn. Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Okay, well, let's just kick off by giving everyone an insight into who is Lee? What does Lee do? Where does Lee come from? Just a quick overview of who you are.
Okay, yeah, sure. Who is Lee? So, okay, my name's Lee Puri. I am co-founder of a digital advertising company called MIQ Digital. We launched a company nearly 13 years ago from here in London, me and my business partner, Gorman Handel. Fully self-funded as a business, which we might go into actually in terms of kind of some of the reasons for that later. But yeah, fully bootstrapped as a company on day one. And I do like to say, actually, I think that we're one of the few kind of self-funded billion-dollar businesses that have come from the UK. So hugely kind of proud of that. But when we scaled the company in the early days, we recognized that we needed to go international. So now we've got offices literally all over the world. We've got a heap of offices in the US, in Toronto, and in Canada. We're in Singapore, Australia, the Middle East. Our biggest office is in India, down south. I recently launched us in China as well. So that's kept me pretty busy, Lynn, for the last 13 years, kind of scaling out MIQ and kind of, delivering for our people and our clients.
Wow, I mean, that is pretty impressive stuff. And it's funny because we're going to go back down memory lane in a second to your beginnings. But I've got to ask you, when you were a kid or even as an adult or a teenager, did you ever think you would sit there saying, I have a self-funded $1 billion company? I mean, that word in itself is pretty huge.
It is. And if I'm being completely honest, even now, it kind of still sounds strange. I think for both me and my business partner. But to answer your question, no, it was just never within my my reality. It was never something that I kind of aspired to, because it was something that just it wasn't in my lexicon. It just wasn't a thing. And I will say that even when we launched the company on day one, we never really launched it thinking that we'd get to this position right now. A lot of it was, did we have the ability to get this thing up and running? And if we did, how long could we run with it, in order to kind of, continue to scale? It was never about the money on day one. And as ludicrous as it sounds, it's still not about the money right now. There's a deeper, I think for me, there's a deeper meaning to why we launched the company, and more importantly, why we continue to exist. And it's not just numbers on a bank statement.
Yeah, well, we'll come to that in a second. And I actually think, you've hit on something quite deep, because the metric of success to a lot of people is money. How much do you earn? How much is your company worth? Actually, when you drill into it, well, as we all know, and it's a pretty obvious thing for me to say, but there's more to that in life than just money. If you don't have your health, you don't have other things, what's the bloody point, So, but we are going to explore that as we go through. So can you just kick us off then? Where were you brought up, or actually, where were you born?
Yeah. Okay. So day one, I was born in Bradford, up in West Yorkshire. I don't know if you've had the pleasure, but so I spent my early years kind of living in various kind of council houses up in Bradford with mum and dad. And then we moved over to Halifax, which is, a small Yorkshire town, a few miles down the road from Bradford. And that's where I spent a lot of my formative years. I left there when I was 18, basically. Both kind of Halifax, Bradford, are your typical working class northern towns, where, I think that the people that that come from, from there are fiercely proud in terms of Yorkshire, fiercely proud in terms of, our working class roots. And it plays a big part in terms of my identity for kind of who I am today. Even now, when people say to me, where are you from? My instinct is still to say I'm from Yorkshire, but the reality is, and I'm going to show my age now, the reality is I left there 30 years ago. I live in Surrey.
Wow.
But it's firmly entrenched in me as my, kind of my northern roots, as it were.
Yeah, well, you've not lost accent, so there you go. You're doing something right.
Well, yeah, if you speak to my children, they say to me, like, Dad, you're not northern. You actually are from down south now. But yeah, thanks. That does mean a lot then. Yeah, cheers.
So when you were brought up in Bradford, so you were born there, and then do you have like siblings or
No, only
an only
child,
child?
basically. Yeah,
Ah,
yeah.
what was that like? Because I'm the youngest of seven, so I can't imagine. Well, though my son's an only child, but yeah, what's it like being an only child?
Uh, Again, it was kind of I didn't know any different. And the one thing I will say is that I've always been very social. I remember growing up as a kid and just playing out. I don't know if that's just a thing of the times in the 70s. That's just what kind of it was just a thing where I grew up in. But I just, my memory of being a kid is just always being out, always playing out with friends from dawn till dusk. So yeah, I didn't really, I didn't have a solitary kind of existence as an only child. I just remember always having fun and kind of always playing out.
Yeah, it was always a case, wasn't it? Like years ago, because I was born in the 70s, and it was always a case of, and when I say the 70s, 79, so it was mainly an 80s child. But you were out, literally, you weren't allowed in the house. If it
Yeah,
was a nice day, we were told, get out, get fresh air in your lungs. And, as long as my mom knew where we were, she didn't mind. She was probably a bit more protective over me. But I think you're right. Kids just went out and you knew to come back when it got dark.
yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing I've got to kind of check myself now in that we live in a different world now with regards to kids, right? And there's more things to keep them entertained and occupied, within the four walls. But I'm just kind of like, we need to get out, kids. Come on, like this is not how I used to live my life, but it is a different world, certainly to the 1970s kind of growing up. But
I bet you
that's a,
they probably. What was that? Say that again.
that's a whole different podcast talking about that, right?
I know, honestly. Yeah, your kids now think you're the old fashioned one. It's like, my God, you're so not with the times, Dad.
Yeah, definitely.
So tell me about your growing up then. So obviously you're in Bradford, an only child. Wow, was spoiled. I don't know if you were spoiled or not, but I'm sure there was a bit of that. But yeah, what was life like kind of every day?
Yeah, okay. So I think if I go right, I mean, life every day was very, that the household was always a fun house. There were always friends coming around, in terms of my friends, but also parents, friends. There was always a lot of music, kind of in the house, a lot of food. Yeah. So I when I grew up, my dad is from India. My mom is English and white. So I grew up in a very multicultural kind of household, which again I didn't know that was, I didn't know any different. That for me it was quite normal to have, kind of curry multiple times a week. It's quite normal. I didn't know that people had barbecues to have burgers and sausages. I just thought it was tandoori chicken, right? So it's not until I got to a teenager that I started to realize it was different. But life was, it was very, very, for myself. There was never there was never a thing about money or anything like that. It was always about people coming around. There's always laughter. There was always a warmth there, which I'll be honest, as a father, is something that I'm desperate to replicate for my own children in terms of their experience as well. But yeah, life was a really my upbringing was I can't think of any really significant kind of things about my upbringing. It was just a very pleasant time. And it played a really important part, I think, in terms of making me kind of who I am today, in terms of the values that I've got, in terms of who I stand for, what I stand for as a person.
Yeah, I remember those days, and I always remember like our neighbours and our family, and everybody was in, and it was always about, you're right, it was never about money. It was always about putting food on the table, so that made you rich. Our family was always, their currency was food, or my mum's currency certainly. We were overfed. I'm surprised. I've said this in other interviews. I'm surprised I wasn't like obese as a kid. Like I could eat whatever I liked. I was never limited in any way. So
Yeah.
but you're right. I think whilst being working class, it's quite a privilege, isn't it, to have a lot of people about you pretty much a lot of the time.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. It's I think when I think about working class, and I've spent a lot of time kind of just when you invite me onto this podcast, Lynn. I spent a lot of time thinking about it and talking to my wife and friends and so on. And it's first of all, congratulations. It's an absolutely fantastic kind of podcast in terms of what it stands for and the experiences and richness that I think comes from some of the dialogue that you have with people. But for me, it's much like my accent, right? I left Yorkshire 30 years ago, but I still see myself as a northerner. I had that foundational kind of experience as a child, which was exclusively living in a working class environment. And subsequently, as we've moved through the years and kind of professionally, things have changed, and undoubtedly there is more kind of there is much more money, obviously, but I inside viscerally kind of identify kind of more than ever as kind of as a working class person, because I believe it's played such an important part in terms of making me who I am, that blueprint of who I am as a values and so on. And interestingly, it's also with regards to my wife, so she's from East End of London, from Dagenham, and she also comes from a similar background. Her dad's in his mid 70s. He's a window cleaner. He still goes up and down the ladder at his age. But so the two of us have, kind of, I suppose when we talk about, and one thing which may come up is this notion of social mobility and how do you identify with your background and where you come from as you move through life and move through kind of the experience of what wealth brings. And this has really been something that I think the two of us have discussed a lot in terms of kind of fundamentally, what do we stand for as people, and what's our background given us in terms of what we want to kind of pass on when I talk about my children. What experience of being working class do we want to can we share with our with our children, because undoubtedly their experience that they've got, and I've got three beautiful children now, but their experience is not growing up in a council estate in Bradford, or growing up in Dagenham, kind of where my wife comes from. They've got a different experience of education. They've got a different experience of everything. But how can we instill some of what we believe has been so important and intrinsic to us and our success? How can we instill that in our children? And that's that's the ever-ending conundrum, I think, that we talk about a lot as parents. But
Yeah, you want to keep your values alive, don't you? Well, it'd be amiss of me not to ask, what do you stand for?
That's okay. You know what? Some of the values of my company, of MIQ, I played a really obviously a key part in terms of talking about them. So one of the values that we've got at MIQ, which I identify a lot with, is courage. I think that for me, that notion of being brave and having courage, I think is really, really powerful. I think just starting, a company, 13 years ago. My wife was actually pregnant with our second child at the time, right? So I remember saying to her, Tracy, I've got an idea. I'm going to give up my great paid job, and I'm going to use all our life savings, and we're going to remortgage the house. I'm going to start a business with my mate. And she looked at me in the eye and she said, "Okay, Lee, I've got one ask for you, and that is just don't lose the house. But if you believe in it, I believe in you. Go and do it." And I think courage has played such an important kind of role for myself, and it's a value for MIQ. Determination is another one. My son's going through his GCSEs right now, and my advice to him is, look, if you get all A stars, then great. If you don't get all A stars, that's also great. I just want you to do your very best. That's all that matters to me as your father, and that's all that should be important, to him as a young man, is do your very best. And again, that's one of the values in MIQ. And then passion, like do what your passion is. It's what's the old adage? If you do what your passion is, you'll never work a day in your life, which I think is really powerful, right? So yeah, there's some of the kind of values that mean a lot to me. And then there's obviously this honesty and integrity, which kind of are absolutely kind of instrumental as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think you're right. And I think a lot of this is very inherent of being working class. So let's take you back then. So you're talking about your growing up. Where did you go to school, and were you any good?
Yeah. Okay. So I just went to a local comp in Halifax, which was a pretty good school. It wasn't great. It wasn't bad. And I, as a student, um, again, I think I was pretty. I was all right. Certainly wasn't an excellent student. I was very interested in like playing football, and if I'm being completely honest, Lynn, I'm probably more interested in girls as well than actually knuckling down and doing the work. But I got through school with half decent grades. I managed to just about get into university. And the rest is history from an academic perspective. But for me, what I got from schooling was the importance of kind of I think the competitive edge from sport has really served me well, I think, over the years. But also I think the social skills as well, and the importance of building strong kind of resilient friendship circles and so on. That's when I think of school. That's the thing I think about. That's what I got from it right now. I certainly wasn't a grade A student, unfortunately. But obviously, when I talk to my children, that's a different story. I say that I worked a lot harder probably than I did.
It's so true. It's funny when you get into adulthood and you start going for jobs. It's always that point of when do you take school off your CV?
Yeah.
And I remember my son, like he's gonna, he put his CV together and stuff, and I looked at it and I'm thinking, okay, you're probably at the age 21, right? Keep your school on just now, but soon, Lewis, that can probably drop right off because I think people have sussed out you probably went whether you were good or not, and nobody's going to check your grades anyway. Not that I'm advocating people cheat, but nobody phones up your school and asks you, do
they? Exactly. But,
so
yeah.
So you said you get into uni then. So what did you do?
So I studied psychology and English at university. So yeah, there were two things that I was really, really passionately about. Interestingly, so I actually my first year. So when I did my A levels, I listened to my father, and he said, "Lee, if you want to get into a career in business, then you need to study computers because this is back in early 90s." And he said, "You need to study computers, and you need to study a language." So I'd done particularly well in my A levels in English and drama. So I went from that to doing computer programming and French. So as you could appreciate, it probably didn't end that well that first year, Lynn. But I learned a lot about myself in that year. But I learned a lot as well in terms of, if you again, it goes back to that passion, right? And you've got to do what interests you and what makes your heart beat faster. And I realized coming out of that failed first year that I had to live a life that was authentic to me, and I had to do what I wanted to do. And that meant, studying psychology and studying English. And I always remember my dad saying to me, he said, "Lee, what the hell are you going to do with a psychology and an English degree?" And my answer then was, I don't know what I'm going to do, but all I know is that I enjoy it. And if I enjoy it, I'm going to figure out what the future's got to bring. And yeah, so university went okay, actually. I had a good, positive time there.
Yeah, I'm sure you had a lot of fun as well, but we won't go into that in this podcast. And so, what did your mum and dad do for a living?
Okay, so my mom had various admin type. She never really kind of embarked too much into a career from her perspective. There's various kind of administration type kind of roles. But my dad's, what, on this, with regards to talking about this working class to world class, it's brought me back to think a lot about my father and the influence I think that he's had and his experience has had over the years, certainly with regards to myself. So just to take you back, right? So my dad grew up in the region of Punjab in India in the 40s and 50s, and he came from, at the time, a place of wealth, right? They had a really big house, a swimming pool. They used to have helpers, cooks, chauffeurs, blah 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 blah. And when he came to Yorkshire in the early 60s to study, to come to university, which was that was quite an unusual thing, right? But his parents had money at the time, and they could afford to send him to England to get educated. And he came to, he talks a lot about it. Bless him. My dad actually wrote a book, because I said, "Dad, you've got to get your story out. It's so interesting." And he always tells me, he's like, "Lee, but I came from having money in India, and I came to England in the early 60s, and I realized that I didn't really have any money. And you can imagine the experience of a young teenage Indian boy in England in the 1960s, right? It was challenging." But he worked hard, and he got a degree, and then he got himself a PhD in chemistry. So his first job, he was actually a director of a pharmaceutical company for his first job. He basically, from his journey onwards, continued to kind of scale, and as a from a professional perspective. The reason why I'm telling you this is that we started as a family, kind of like from a working class kind of background, living in various council houses in Bradford, and then they got on the property ladder when they bought in Halifax. But what I experienced throughout my life was, and I didn't know how to articulate it at the time, but it was social mobility. Because what never made any sense, and it still doesn't to my dad today, is the class system that we've got in this country, because it doesn't apply in India. Okay, so when my dad came, right, where he sat on the class system was almost kind of, it was irrelevant to him, because he couldn't identify with it. So when he started to, he got his first job, and then he lived in council houses, and then he got a little bit more money, and then he could move through, in terms of various houses and so on. It's never been something for my dad that has kind of limited him. Because I believe from a class perspective, for a lot of people, it is used to almost kind of subjugate, right? It's kind of stay within your swim lane, go to live in that area, accept that job, that level of pay, kind of get that level of education and so on and so on. Whereas it's never had any relevance whatsoever to my father. So I've kind of always learned and looked and seen firsthand, like, kind of like my own father kind of upwardly go mobile, always improving, working hard, always improving, and just building the building blocks for success. And I think when I look at kind of my experience, whether or not it's conscious or unconscious, it must have played a part in who I am, because kind of where I'm at today is I've almost followed a very similar path to my father in terms of social mobility. Yes, I'm different in that I identify extremely deeply and proudly in terms of having working class roots. But I think that, looking at my father and looking at how he progressed throughout his career, it probably unconsciously has played a really important role in my life, in my narrative, really.
Wow, what a story. I mean, can you imagine, like, and I'm sure you've thought about this often, but for me, hearing this for the first time, coming from a place where you're pretty wealthy, you're doing all right, you've got the pool, you've got the life, to come somewhere where you're stripped of that because it doesn't exist, it doesn't translate over here. So that must have been, and that's maybe where your courage comes from. The fact that your dad didn't say, okay, I'm going to go back to India because actually I've got such a wonderful life there. He had to then graft, I guess. And I suppose that does something to a person where you're not up there now, you're here, regardless of where you identify as class. The reality is if you can afford what you can afford. So God, hats off to your dad for doing that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm super proud of him. But yeah, I think it's just played a really, really important part, in myself. But I think when I think about my children, who live a very different experience now, of course they do. But how do we get that instilled into them, that drive to always be better? Because they come from a different place right now, and they're kind of whether or not it's privilege or even entitlement, which are two words that kind of they're really great, but how do you try and remove that so that they can kind of almost kind of work their way through and up to what they want to be, because my father had it and I certainly had it, kind of I still feel like I've got it now.
Yeah, do I think it's true, and it's probably quite a worry, isn't it, for a lot of people when it comes to their kids, because what you don't want is arrogant kids who think the world owe them just because they're, as you say, entitled or privileged or whatever the word is. But I think when you strip it back, I was thinking about this other week, thinking, say you had someone who was super rich and someone who's not, take away the money, what's left? So for me, that's when you really delve into the person. It's almost like not brain science. It's like being a decent person. It's about having the belief in yourself, but also I think the kindness showing to others. I'm a great believer in karma. I do think what goes around comes around. Sometimes not always the way it should be, but it's life. But I do think there's something in just almost just being a decent person, seeing everyone's worth, no matter what job they do, whether you're the cleaner or whether you're the CEO, it doesn't really matter. Everybody's got a purpose and they've all got something to play in society as a whole. So for me, with my son, I never ever, like, he never had a silver spoon. Like we still live in Scotland. So for me, it was always, I was able to do the global role before even COVID was a thing and people work remote. Oh my goodness, we can work remote. Oh, really? Yeah, of course you can. But, but for my son, I've never moved to London, never made that move. And part of me, I do feel guilty about that sometimes, thinking, oh God, should have, because I probably could have progressed even further. I just didn't want to, because I didn't want to leave my family. So was that hard for you, moving away from everyone?
It's okay. So the story is that it's linked back to my father again, because his job was always moving forward, so he moved basically to the south of England when I was finishing my GCSEs, and basically because he got a job at the body shop at the time. And so I basically wanted to be nearer. So I finished my A-levels. I decided to stay in Yorkshire and finish my A-levels. So I stayed with some family friends and boarded with them because I didn't want to move down south at the time. But then I decided that I wanted to be nearer to my parents, and that's why I went to university in London to be nearer them. So it was kind of difficult, but to be honest, at that time, at the end of when you do A levels, I think that's when you find a lot of your friends do disperse to various parts of the country. So that felt a very good, definite time to do that. Whereas originally I was meant to go to the south of England when I finished my GCSEs when I was 16, that was the wrong time. I couldn't do it. I tried it for a week and I went back because I couldn't do it. I couldn't leave my friends. It feels awful saying it. It felt easier to leave my family than leave my friends at that time. It really did. Yeah.
That makes sense. I guess it's an age thing. And, see when you talk about your life, I mean, it sounds pretty stable. It's not privileged. It's just kind of normal. But was there any points in your journey where you did come across, whether it be hardships or you came across adversity or, yeah, but what was, or was it all just quite nice?
Um, in terms of hardships, they were. I wouldn't say there's ever been like real hardships. I'm not saying it's all been plain sailing, Lynn. But yeah, I think my parents worked hard to create kind of a stable kind of upbringing for myself, certainly from a financial perspective. We were certainly never rich, but money was just never, it was never a thing. And that's a good thing there because it never was a problem for any of us kind of growing up. What I would say, and this is not adversity, right? But when I made the decision to start MIQ in 2010, and like I said, we basically we had to use a heap of avenues in order to fund the business. Then when I said to my wife, I said like, look, we can. This is what how we're gonna have to live, and we didn't have a lot of money to live to raise two children at the time. And I wouldn't say that's really adversity, but we had to strip back everything, and I mean everything, in order to get through those, kind of like 12 months. And it's little things like, I used to live about 17 miles away from London when we first started the company. It's things like, right, okay, well, if I can save X amount of money every week, I can just ride a bike into London. And you know what? It was one of the most rewarding, kind of happiest times of, I think, our life in those early days, because it really taught me that the material stuff that you have around you, it really doesn't matter when you really strip it all back. And some of the things that you think are important in terms of kind of spending money on, when that decision and choice is removed, your quality of life doesn't drop off a cliff. And I think that for me was quite enlightening, if I'm being honest, because I expected those initial months and years even of starting the company to be really difficult for me and my family. But what happened in the end was that's the opposite. Now, I don't want to denigrate people that, kind of there is a cost of living crisis and so on. Hugely, I'm massively sympathetic there. But all I'm saying in terms of, from me, from an adversity perspective, that was our experience as a family, that we stripped back to the bare minimum, and we came through that. We came through it. So that's probably, I would say, the biggest challenge financially that we ever had, because the reality is that if we didn't get through those 6 to 12 months or so, then I would have probably had to have full, the business, or certainly my side of the business. But we were just so determined that we were going to do it. We were so it was I've never felt it was almost kind of like there was a fire. I remember one time going with my business partner, and we went for a drink after we treated ourselves to a drink after work, and I remember just having this adrenaline and it was just this energy running through me, which you know what I would love to have that again, that feeling of exhilaration, which I think I think it comes with doing your own thing. I think it comes with that, stepping into your own power. Um, and that came at a time when there was actual, we were cutting it financially right down to the bone. So yeah.
Wow, what a story. And well, firstly, all I would say is what an amazing wife you've got. So the fact that she allowed you to risk everything, although she said about the house, but hey, who knows what could have happened. And I think it goes back to what my mum used to say is cut your cloth accordingly. So even as an adult, I don't have a credit card. I live by the rule of I can't afford it, I can't have it. And that's just the way I've always lived my life. So because of that, I have the boundaries in my head in which I am willing to play, but it doesn't make me unhappy. Like during COVID, I think, honestly, this like boohoo me. But for 2 years, I didn't buy any clothes, didn't buy any because I wasn't going anywhere. I was like literally a tramp in my own house. And I spent more time in my pajamas. I think everybody did. But for 2 years, I didn't buy anything. And do you know what? It actually doesn't affect. Who cares? Like I didn't need it. So, and now obviously out of COVID, I make excuses because I have to, make up for all the times I didn't buy anything. So, I mean, see for you, like you obviously made the journey to London. So what job did you go after? Or how did you get this job after uni then?
Okay, so I was desperate to carry on my university experience. So I got a job as the editor of the university magazine, which actually meant that I got my office above the student union. So I did that for 12 months. So which was great fun. And I basically realized that I was pretty good at sales. And because we needed to get a little bit of extra funds in order to pay for the student magazine, for the rack. And I remember I just tried selling to like an aquarium, a dry cleaner, and so and so on. I was pretty good at it. So once I finished that gig, I got a job basically doing telesales. And it was the bottom of the bottom. This telesales gig. I was basically selling advertising space in a business directory that had been around for 25 years, but no one had ever seen the business directory, which made it a bit tricky to sell, right? Because people were like, "Well, can you send me a copy?" I said, "Well, I've never seen a copy." So I did that for about 6, 7 months, and that was like there was no base salary involved or anything. It was commission only. So I worked my proverbial off for about 6, 7 months for quite literally peanuts. I didn't really earn anything. And I thought after about 6 months, enough's enough. I can't carry on like this. And I then got a job selling classified advertising in a weekly car magazine. And that was just like, oh my gosh, it's kind of like people know about this magazine, they can buy it. It's got a proper audited circulation. And I just very quickly established myself as a very, very good seller. And that was the springboard for my career from there, really. I got various roles getting into selling online pretty early in around 2000. I got into selling digital advertising. And then basically made the decision because I launched for 2 separate companies. I launched them digital divisions, performance divisions, and I decided after launching within an established business that this performance division, and it went on to sell did the company. I decided I was going to I was going to back myself, and rather than make money for other people, I was going to give it a go for myself. And I think it was one of the best decisions I ever made.
I think you might be right, actually. And it's funny because I think telesales is so underrated. Like that's where I started out. So I worked in a sports shop, and then I worked for the Sunday Times, and I always remember going for this interview. And no, it wasn't. I'm telling a lie. It wasn't before the Sunday Times. I sold advertising. This was a copy taker, stroke promotions assistant role in the Sun. And I remember rocking up to this interview, and I put together this suit that was like cheap. It was so cheap. You probably spit through it. And it was like non-matching jacket and skirt. And because I thought you wore skirts going to offices, and I didn't know. And I remember going for this interview thinking, I've got nothing to lose because somebody from Clydebank is probably never going to get this anyway. And I always remember getting in with not confidence, just of nothing, because I didn't think I'd get it. But the one thing I could do because of the big family was I could chat and I could build a rapport. And so what I had to do in that job interview is work out what the job was, because I had no access to internet. So I didn't know what a copy taker was or a promotion system. Like, what even is that? They're just words. So, and I always remember it. Then I thought, I'm quite good at selling, because I'm suddenly now listening, understanding, selling myself. And even in the sports shop, I was selling like these Sears cards to people. Soon got I wasn't selling them. They were opening up these store cards. And I soon got a conscience as to who not to give it to, because I knew they probably couldn't afford to pay it back. And so suddenly I started getting this psyche of how to do it, and then eventually get into telesales through people that I knew at the Sun and telesales in the Sunday Times. But the point I'm trying to make is I think there's so much to be said actually for a job like that, because there's so many people that are super successful now that did start doing like the grunt work basically. Yeah. But it was a laugh at the time. I mean, oh my God, the laughs that we had trying to sell classified and then display.
Fun, yeah. I mean, it's difficult, but it's fun, right? I always remember there was one young lad that this is before MIQ, and I was heading up a sales division, and he was a graduate, and I said to him, I said, right, okay, I want you to go buy a classified, it was a classified car magazine at the time. He was selling digital advertising. And I want you to go through, and I want you to sell at the back of the magazine. You've got all the small ads. I want you to call them all and sell them like online as an opportunity. He said, right, okay, right. I feel really bad even to this day that I forgot like that he was there, because I was just busy doing other things. And then it was like, I think it was about a week or two later, he said, Lee, I finished the whole section. He must have called about 400 of these companies. He said, what do you want me to do now? I was like, oh my God, I'm really sorry. But, but it turns out it was the best thing for that young lad, because he turned out to be a brilliant salesperson and ultimately went on, to work all over the world and take various kind of management roles. But I think that if you can build that resilience at a very, very early stage in your career, and telesales or whatever it will be, I think it's always going to set you in a good place. It really is. Maybe I went too far by kind of leaving the poor guy to get through. But
he'd lost his throat after he had a sore throat, didn't he?
Yeah, but he still talks about it now. I saw him recently, and he still talks, but he says it with a smile on his face, and he'll probably replicate it, maybe not to the extreme that I did there. Yeah. But I think telesales he played a really important part in terms of my success. I really do. But I also think that maybe coming from my background as well, because I have no level of entitlement or anything. I was like, well, I will do whatever I need to do in order to make some money. And if that meant, starting at the bottom of the bottom to do it, that's exactly what I do. Would I, can I see a time where my kids would have that tenacity to do that? I don't know. Is that down to me by giving them a comfortable upbringing? It probably is. So that's probably something I'm going to need to work through. But
yeah, a good work through and make your peace with, because you're not going to change. You're not going to put them out in the streets now, are you? So I think you have to work through that one. And so, see, for you, obviously we've talked about MIQ and we've talked about your business partner Gurman. Sure. How did you meet, and how did you then decide to do the kind of business that you've got now? Because I guess it was out with or was it within the area of your expertise at the time?
Yeah. So we used to work for a digital advertising company, and I was a director back in 2003, right? So and Gorman is younger than me, 10 years younger, right? So he basically came as an intern for 1 year work experience. Um, and I remember meeting this young lad, and there was something about him. He just kind of he was just so he was a really good listener, is a really good listener, and he was just really smart and really diligent. And he basically within a few weeks of kind of this internship, he started to shake things up and make business recommendations that were, let's just say, catching a few people by surprise and calling a few people out. But he wasn't meaning to do it. It was just being who he is. And then he basically finished university, when he finished the internship, finished university. And then I said to him, I said, like, look, you have to come and work with me, work in sales, which is what he did. But then within about 3 months, I was headhunted by our biggest competitor to go and start a division for them. So I always remember I couldn't sleep the night before having to tell Gorman in particular, because we were friends, as well as, I was his boss at the time. But anyway, me leaving the next day was, Gorman often says it's the best thing that ever happened to him in his career, because he stepped straight into my shoes a little bit too quickly, actually. And so we became friends, but also competitors. And then we stayed that way for about 3 years. And then around the time of 2009, what we saw is that the digital advertising space was changing within the UK. Technology was being brought into the mix, and the way that businesses defined themselves, was fundamentally, it was going to change. So that's when both me and Gorman, we got together, and I said to Gorman, I said, I've got this idea. I want to launch this business. This is what it's going to stand for. This is how I think it can work. And within, I think it took Gorman about 5 seconds. He was like, "Let's do it." And since that day, we never really looked back. But that's one thing I think is really important as well. Is for me and him, as business partners, is that first and foremost we were friends. It was a trust that was there, because I think what happens a lot within business partnerships is that it breaks down, the relations break down, because there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of money, there's a lot of things that can make it go wrong. But we had a trust to our partnership, which was built out of friendship. And we liked and like each other as well, which was super, super important. But yeah, so it's work, kind of for myself and Gorman now. I've known him a long time, yeah, and his story as well is very, very similar in that he comes from a working class background. His parents owned a small shoe shop in Luton. He's UK Indian, like very, very strong working class kind of values as a person as well. And I think that almost cemented itself when the two of us came together, because we came from similar backgrounds, obviously very different in terms of geography, but very similar backgrounds. So when we launched MIQ, the core, the nucleus, and what we wanted to stand for in terms of our values. We talk a lot about building out a company which puts our people first. And we both believed that in day one, and we believe it today as well. And I think that comes from coming from backgrounds that we could both identify with.
Yeah. And I think the decency thing, I think from what I can hear loud and clear, is why you are so successful. Because I think inherently what I'm getting here is that you do care about people, and you care about being a decent, you want the job done, you won't tolerate fails gladly, but you are fundamentally a good person. And actually it's so nice when we do these sort of, when I do these interviews, to hear the good people that do well. It makes me tick. I love it, because I'm a fellow working class person, as you know. And do you think, like, when you look back, and not do you think, I know the answer, but has your parents ever said to you how proud they are of you?
Oh my gosh, yeah, they have, yeah, and that for me is one of the proudest things. I think that I could ever ask for, and I'm eternally grateful that they're here to be able to say it. But yeah, they do say it, and that for me means the world. When people that you love kind of say, and it comes from a genuine place, and they say, well, I'm really proud of you, really happy for you. That means everything. Because let's be honest, Lynn, there are a lot of people that probably not that happy for it, but like, which is fine.
Yeah.
That's not for me to carry that. I can't. But yeah, for my certainly from my mother, she says it a lot. Because she often refers to where we first started out. In the council estate and a high rise. I don't know, on like 13th, 14th floor in Bradford. And she's always saying, like, who'd have thought you'd have ended up where you are. But what I always say to her is I've ended up where I am because that's where I started.
Yeah.
It's played a really
That
important.
is that's been part of your success story. And so when you look back, obviously your mum, as I said, it was quite an obvious thing to say. Of course, they're proud of you. I think that goes without saying. But do you ever have reflective moments where, and I know it's not always about the money and all this, but, you can't help but think about it because it's like, it's, the fact. But do you ever, or what do you think, like when you just take a moment to go, fucking hell, this is what we've done? Like what goes through your head?
The thing that goes through my head is, I mean, like, of course, I do think, how the hell have we done this to this level, to this scale, and created generational opportunities within my family, but also within MIQ and within our people as well. I think that's been really, really key. But one thing that I think of now, um, increasingly, is I think I've got an opportunity to really kind of stand for what kind of is important for me as a person moving forward. And I think, my experience, and I mentioned it earlier, in terms of kind of social mobility and kind of working through as a young Northern working class boy who's basically risen through the ranks to, kind of launch and scale a business. But I wasn't the obvious person then. Like my dad even says it. He was like, Lee, we never saw this coming with you. My friends say it. They were like, you are the least obvious of all of us to have kind of done what you've done. So I've kind of carried that, right, for consciously or unconsciously, for a long time. That what can I do in terms of like my experience and my story and my network to help other young people that maybe come from kind of backgrounds based in terms of class, in terms of gender, religion, ethnicity, to give them kind of like an opportunity to dream and to think. And so this is something that I'm working through with my wife that I believe will probably take over a large part of my life for the next few decades, which will be, creating a platform for young people that come from, kind of underrepresented kind of communities and identities, create a platform where they can, kind of they get a glimpse and they think, you know what, fuck this, I can do that because of kind of whatever, however it's going to look. The why, if the vision is there in terms of the why, in terms of the how and what I'm going to do. That's what I'm working through as we speak. But that's what goes through my mind when I think about where I am now. Then, because it's kind of like, it's what can I do with this opportunity that I've got to create future opportunities for young people that probably don't come from a place of privilege or entitlement, that come from a place where they think that success and money and so on, that's not what their kind of where their background, their narrative is. And I will say, and this genuinely happened last night, right? I was the door rang, and this young lad was at the gate, and he came in, and then basically the gates to my house, I've got a driveway, they closed behind him. And I said, yeah, how can I help you? And he said, like, I just have to ask you a question, please. He said, I've just walked past and I've seen your house. And I just wanted to just say, like, congratulations. Yeah, I've never seen this lad before in my life. He was only about 18. And he said, I just want to know, I'm just going round asking people, how did you do it? And have you got any tips for me as a young person that I just want to succeed. I just want to make money. And first and foremost, like my experience, like my instinct was like, okay, like, is this guy scoping out the house or anything like that? And then I had to check myself and think, hang on a minute. I think this young lad is just coming from a place of he's in, you know, and he explained he said, I'm a cleaner down at the council offices right now. He said, I can't figure out a way of kind of just you know, breaking out. So, and I just thought he kind of broke my heart a little bit. Actually, I thought this poor young lad, he's been reduced to knocking on doors to ask people how to succeed, how to try and break through. In this case, his class barrier that he feels trapped in, and this is what brought me, you know, when I said to him, I said, like, give me your email address. I said, I haven't got time now, but I said, I'm going to send you some things. And what I'll do with him, you know, is kind of, you know, I'll get some time and I'll meet him for a coffee or something. And because that's when I think about young people like that, that's what it's all about. But it's so powerful, right? That for some people, they feel so disempowered, if that's a word, to be able to bring about change. But this young lad, and it's a true story, he was literally just ringing doorbells to ask how the hell he did it, and
Wow.
that's what goes through my head. That's what when I'm
Yeah.
where how can I help people like that?
Wow, your dream came true last night. And the thing is, I bet you know, give that boy, that young lad, a few years and he'll be coming on the podcast, won't he? So we'll
Yeah.
remember where his story started, you know, to have the audacity and the kind of courage to do that, because you could easily have shut the door in his face. So the fact that he'd done that is just, yeah, hats off. Yeah, brilliant, great stuff. Young guy, whoever you are. And to finish up, then I've got one final question for you. What is Lee's superpower?
Oh God, what is my superpower? I think my superpower. I was talking to my business partner this morning actually, and he said one thing to me which I've lived my life by: is that when everyone's turning right, you just turn left. So don't follow the crowd. You know, kind of listen to what's in there inside in your heart. I think that it's not a very kind of inspiring, kind of sexy superpower, but it is that, be, you know, if it feels right to you, don't follow the crowd. You know, follow what feels right to you. And I think that has served me so well in my life personally and professionally. Is you know, and it started with regards to the university story, and then followed through with regards to launching the company. You know, be true to yourself and don't follow the crowd. Yeah.
I love it. Well, thank you so much. And just thank you for being so candid. I know these things can be a bit overwhelming, especially when you're dipping into your own life story. But, you know, I'm sure you've inspired lots and lots of people. And congratulations. I'm proud of you.
Well, yeah, congratulations for you with this as well. It's a really, really inspiring podcast. I've enjoyed this, but I enjoy listening to people's stories. It's something that yeah, you should be very proud of.
Thank you.